now the top of the hour, so I'd just quickly introduce everyone back to the webinar, but I think that's a very interesting topic. I think all of us have been frustrated by IVRs on quite a regular basis. But now for everybody who's joining us, welcome again to the webinar. My name is Charlie and I'm the features editor here at Call Center Helper. And today we'll be looking at the topic of the contact center of the future. And I have two excellent speakers to bring to you today. The first is Dr. Nicola Millard from BT. How are you doing today, Nicola?
I am very good, Charlie. How are you?
Excellent. Yeah, all good, thanks. So for everybody who's just joining us, would you like to give them a quick overview of your kind of role within the contact center industry?
Sure. Well, I've been in the contact center industry for, as I was saying earlier, 30 years, actually. My BT birthday was last week. My first job in BT was actually to do AI for call centers. So back in 1990 that was, and I feel as if I have in fact come full circle. So for those of you who don't know me, I did used to be a futurologist. I'm now part of BT's innovation team. I am slightly more boringly known as a principal innovation partner. I am the psychologist in the team. And contact centers are just a people business. So my role is to understand both customers and the trends that we're seeing amongst customers, and also on the flip side, the employees, which is mostly what I'm going to talk about today, and what trends we can see reshaping the future world of work.
Excellent, and happy BT birthday last week to you.
A lot of candles.
Yeah. Excellent. And our second speaker today is Mike Murphy from Genesis. How are you doing today, Mike?
Pretty good, Charlie. Great to be here.
Excellent. And I don't know if I'll ask a similar question to you. So if you want to introduce a bit about yourself and your role within the call center industry.
Yeah, so I'm an account exec at Genesis, and we're very much like a leader in the contact center area for providing software to help our customers manage their interactions and manage their people. And my role, if you like, has always kind of been like an onboarding role. I describe it really, Charlie. So as we onboard our customers here at Genesis, we also get to look after them, which is really, I quite like that part. So from that perspective, you kind of fulfill their promise, or you fulfill your promise to them. And that's quite a nice part of my role. So from that perspective, I've got customers who are quite long and quite long in tenure, like 6-7 years, and it's quite nice to kind of watch how they evolve through the technology and pick up new challenges going forward.
Excellent. And I know I've seen a dress rehearsal and two really great presentations from you both to come. So yeah, looking forward to it. Should be a great webinar for everyone to see. But before we get into the presentations, just a quick message to everybody to try and get into our chat room, which you can find by opening up a separate tab or getting out your phone maybe, and just typing in the link that you can see there, www.callcenterhelper.com/chat. Or if you're not up for the challenge of that long out URL, simply type in cch.chat. Awesome. And then what I really like to do when I'm in the chat room is to put the webinar on one side of my screen and the chat room on the other, so I can really kind of keep up to date with all the latest learnings from both. And an added benefit of being in our chat room is that you can download both speakers' slides and also take part in our quiz, which I'll come back to after Nicola's presentation. Another little helpful resource that you might find useful later is that you can look back at the replay and download again those slides by following this link that you now see on the screen, www.callcenterhelper.com/recorded-webinars, and that will be available later this afternoon for you. And also one thing that we like to do on the webinar is give away a good bottle of champagne or a box of chocolates. So there's two prizes up for grabs today, and you can win one of those by winning our quiz, but you can also win by sending in the best tip or best question in the chat room. So put hashtag tip for a tip or hashtag question for a question. Excellent, but that's all from me for now. I will pass over to Nicola, and I will let you share your presentation.
Thank you. Let's share the screen. Hopefully you can see that.
Perfect.
Cool. I like it when the technology works. So yes, hello, my name's Nicola. I do work in innovation in BT. Those of you who have seen me before know that we do extensive amounts of research. So there's a bit of data involved with this presentation. So bear with me. But as I've said, I've been working around the area of things like the future of work for a number of years, and it's been quite fascinating because obviously I've been with BT for a very long time, and I've looked at the contact center industry for a very long time, and one of the quite interesting things is that home working really isn't new. This was another one of my first jobs in BT, actually. I've been very lucky working on some amazing projects. And this was some work we did back in 1992. And it was BT's first serious home working experiment. And it was in a contact center context, albeit it was called directory inquiries at that point. And what we did was, it was a proper experiment. We called it the Inverness experiment for the odd reason that it was based in Inverness. So we got 11 volunteers, and that's the key. They actually did volunteer. We're not necessarily home working by choice now, but we put them, we worked them at home for a year. I was a very small part of the psychological monitoring team on this, because I don't think anyone really had worked from a contact center from home for a year, and we weren't entirely sure whether they were going to stay sane. So there was certainly a mental health part to this project. We also, put in some really interesting stuff, bearing in mind this is 1992. We had things like video conferencing. Admittedly, the video conferencing unit was about the size of a fridge and the quality was horrible. But we had bulletin boards, we had email. We basically wanted to make sure that these guys felt very included. We even built a bespoke desk for them, which we rapidly, we built it down at Adastral Park, which is our main research centre here in Ipswich. And we rapidly found out when we ported it to Scotland that Scottish doorways are a lot smaller than doorways in Suffolk. So we had to actually take them apart and reassemble them. But as you can see, we firstly, on a technology side, which is usually what BT's most interested in, it worked. The trouble was we didn't have things like broadband or 4G or 5G eventually when that gets completely rolled out, but the connectivity wasn't there. So literally we had to bulldoze people's front gardens in order to get the connectivity we needed to run the complete set of tools that we needed for a contact center. So it cost us a lot of money to do this. And it was the money rather than the results of the experiment that meant that we didn't necessarily embrace home working in 92. But I think most of us can relate to the quote around I've taken to cooking more and I found out who my neighbours are, because I think most of us have done that. But we did find service levels had improved. And in fact, it's quite funny because the oft cited 20% increase in productivity for home workers came out of an academic study of Chinese contact centers. So again, the contact center industry has kind of led on quite a lot of the thinking here. And yet the industry as a whole, I don't think embraced it until, of course, one of my Ds erupted. And I keep saying, people notice that all of my trends that I'm going to talk about today begin with the letter D, mainly because I'm a Sesame Street fan, but so the session comes at you by the letter D, but the extent to which we've been disrupted by this small viral thing that's spread around the world has been incredible, and it's accelerated things. A lot of the trends that we were seeing prior to the pandemic, which would include home working, has just been accelerated over the past 6 months. And we can see this across the board. Customer behavior, digital behavior, all sorts of things have just been accelerated. So home working, and I was talking earlier to the guys as we were prepping for the call, I did see somewhere, and I seem to be hallucinating statistics, which is probably quite a bad thing, but I did see somewhere that 85% of agent positions had shifted to home. I think on this very webinar a few times back, that you asked the same question back in April, I think that was, and it was around 75% plus. So we've had a big revolution simply because of the pandemic. And largely, I mean, my role at the moment is to try and tease out a lot of the data that's coming through from what I kind of call a massive global work from home experiment. Forget the Inverness experiment. That was only 11 people. We're looking globally now at huge numbers of people. And what we typically have found is that, yeah, people have adapted. We've adapted very fast to home working. And that does not mean necessarily that we never want to come back in an office again, because I think when you look at the data coming through, the one thing that people do miss are being in the contact center and being in the office. But there are lots of other things that are going on. I mean, our working days have morphed a bit. Maybe not the agents, who are still probably on fairly fixed shifts, but I'm sure a lot of your managers would acknowledge that maybe your working day does not look like the typical 9 to 5 that it used to be. So there's a lot of disruption that has really accelerated some of the trends that we've seen prior to the pandemic. We also had obviously a lot of digital projects working before the pandemic: digital office, digital contact center, digital workplace. And I work with, I work across the board on our UK corporates, our public sector customers, and some of our global corporates as well. And nearly everybody had a digital workplace program. And it's quite interesting, you know, different people have very different definitions of what that actually means. So again, as an academic, I like to ask questions. And this was a survey we did globally about 18 months ago. I've just got new data on this, but I haven't actually unpicked it yet. But one of the questions we did ask was, well, why are you doing digital work? What's the point of it? And it wasn't rocket science, but it was all about productivity. And again, you know, based on a lot of that previous work around productivity improving when people work from home, that was one aspect of the jigsaw puzzle piece. The trouble, of course, is that from an agent perspective, it's quite easy to measure productivity, which is why a lot of academic studies, including mine, to be perfectly honest, are based on contact centers, because we can measure pretty much everything. So we can prove, you know, did average call handle time go up or down? How many calls did they take? You know, all of that kind of stuff we can prove. But not everyone working from home is an agent. And I think certainly on the manager's side, this is why we're seeing some quite interesting things coming out from managers, because the bulk of home workers generally are knowledge workers. And the trouble with knowledge workers is they are incredibly difficult to measure. And the only real measure we seem to have, which is a bad measure, is the amount of time that we work. And I call this a productivity proxy. And you saw from the previous slide that people on average are working about 48 minutes a day longer. That isn't necessarily a good thing, because actually longer hours cultures often are less productive, simply because we get tired. Now, I've not got many answers to some of these questions, sadly, and it is the topic of some research that we're doing with the likes of MIT. It's one of our lovely innovation ecosystem in BT. So they're trying to think, well, how do you measure a knowledge worker without resorting back to a very much more factory-based model where you manufacture widgets? Because for sure, I've not done a lot of widget manufacturing since I've been working from home. So that's one problem. I'm going to park that one because I think it's an interesting discussion. We don't have that much time. I think I also need to talk about the digital part of that transformation process is far more than the technology. The technology, it's almost, I dare say that it's a perfect time for a pandemic at the moment. If we'd had one in 1992, if we'd had one even 10 years ago, I think we would have struggled getting our agents effectively working from home, getting ourselves effectively working from home. But technologies like cloud, like video conferencing, and the connectivity that we have now, I don't have to bulldoze people's gardens anymore, have enabled us to work in very different ways. And again, you know, we could have done that prior to the pandemic as well, but it's often culture that holds us back. And there's a whole load of stuff going on at the moment around the fact that technology has accelerated a lot of this. Culture is kind of running to catch up. And although again, we've adapted really well, we do need to think about how we adapt our cultures longer term. And that's everything from how do we manage remote teams? There's a lot of talk about, well, you need to trust by default rather than having to monitor and micromanage people. Trust them, treat them like adults, unless they give you a reason to distrust. Management, it shouldn't be about micromanaging. It should be very much around checking up and checking in with your people. Are they okay? Are they feeling okay? Can they do their job? Do they have everything they need? That's more the kind of management you want. But having done quite a few interviews over the past 6 months, particularly with contact centers, as I said, the agents seem to have adapted pretty well. There are some ifs and buts there, but the majority of agents, their job materially has not changed. They're on their shifts, they're handling customers, they're doing multiple channels. So they kind of have adapted really quite fast. It's the team leaders and the managers that are struggling a lot more. And again, you know, good team leaders do manage by walking around. They watch and see if they can see people struggling. They sit by and coach. That you can do digitally, but it's a lot more difficult. So it makes the leadership role a lot more difficult. And that goes right down to even things like culture, which is easy to create in a physical workspace because, again, you can see people, you can observe behaviors. In a digital space, leaders need to bring that culture out and actually bring out good behaviors and call out bad behaviors as well. And we know things like onboarding and training have become infinitely more difficult with new employees. Again, not impossible in the digital space. It's just harder than in physical. But I have to say that most of us are probably going to be going into an era of hybrid working. Once we have more choices over how, where, and when we work, we will have teams in the contact center. We will have teams remote. And the problem then is you can get different tribes evolving. So the office workers versus the remote workers. And as Frankie Goes to Hollywood once said, two tribes can go to war. And again, that's not what you want. We want people to be able to work together wherever they happen to be perfectly honest. So that's probably my biggest anxiety as we go into the future. One of my other Ds is Dilbert. And this is really around questioning physical spaces. There's a lot of discussion generally, not just about contact centers, but about offices. And chief financial officers are looking at expensive real estate, and they're seeing that potentially, I think BT, it depends on the lockdown regulations, but we're running at about 40% capacity at the moment in our office buildings. We have to do that because we cannot run at 100% capacity. We have to measure that capacity. We have to create rota systems. And, you know, that COVID safe office means that capacity has to be reduced. And of course, then the chief financial officers are going, well, productivity hasn't been that badly impacted by home working. Why do I need all of this real estate? Now, the answer ultimately is that you probably do, because again, prior to the pandemic, we'd seen, you know, particularly physical office spaces becoming places where you collaborate. Contact centers are definitely places, they're very social. So we're social creatures, we're social animals. And because contact center work is pretty difficult, there's also that social glue that comes with, you know, being able to see people around you. So that's the one thing that people are missing as well. And the other thing is that we are seeing, although we're on the same ocean, we're not in the same boat. And I think in terms of home working generally, we are finding that about 70% of people they've adapted fine. 30% are really struggling. And typically that 30% are younger. The reason being that they might not have an appropriate workspace in their house, or they're in a shared house, or they live with their parents, which is another challenge. Personality type, like an extrovert, are struggling way more than an introverts. Similarly, neurotics are struggling a little bit more than those who are high on agreeableness scale. And obviously, when schools were where it depends where you are in the world as to whether schools are back or not. But having kids around is also quite an interesting challenge when you're trying to manage productivity. So I keep saying, you know, the contact center especially is quite a challenge in terms of being COVID safe. It's very difficult to wear a mask in a contact center, and obviously talking for most of the day does tend to generate a lot of aerosols. And we have seen quite a number of outbreaks in contact centers, usually the ones that are slightly higher density than maybe they should be in terms of COVID safe. But we've also had a lot of discussion around the more hyper-local trend. So there was a lot around co-working spaces emerging prior to the pandemic. And again, with climate change in the back of our minds, rather than having to commute 2 hours into a centralized office or contact center, if I don't want to work from home, what's my other option? And there were lots of co-working spaces starting to bubble up. And to be honest, that's been exacerbated. Places like Paris have been talking about this concept of the 15-minute city. So if I want to get out of the house, could I go to a hub that's within a bike ride or a cycle ride away? And we had actually done quite a number of experiments with that, notably with a retailer around a community hub where they could recruit contact center advisors from that community. Now, I think we have a poll question, so I am going to hand back to Charlie to ask the question, and we'll see what the answer is when you see what the question is. So, Charlie.
Excellent. Yes, we do indeed. I will launch the poll for everybody and I will talk everybody through it. So yes, the question is, which type of contact center do you think you'll be working in post-COVID? Do you think a permanently remote contact center, a hybrid contact center, or a permanent contact center, i.e. no home working, go back to how it used to be maybe? I don't know, without ruining the rest of your presentation, Nicola, do you have any thoughts on what this might be?
I think we're going to be looking at hybrids. So yeah.
Okay, excellent. I'll wait a couple more people polling. I see we've got lots of responses already, so I'll end the polling and I'll share the results with everybody. And yes, you are indeed correct, with 84% expecting to move to a hybrid contact center model, which I think is very promising. Also, the 9% are permanently remote and a 7% permanent contact center. Excellent. I will stop sharing those and pass back to you, Nicola.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting. So yeah, I do think we're looking at hybrids. I think we need to resist getting horrible hybrids where we do get those two tribes going to war. I think a lot of the emphasis of the research that we've been doing at the moment is how do you equip your employees to choose to work from anywhere, obviously with compromises, with boundaries potentially as well. But I think that that mix is good. I think permanent home working, as we discovered in BT, is quite hard. And we've all discovered that over the past 6 months. So I think being able to get out of that house is definitely a boon, but it will be permission to go into the office, I suspect, whilst we are trying to handle this pandemic, rather than permission to work from home. But actually, I mean, our previous experiences, and I'm sure some of you out there have extensive numbers of home working agents and have had them for years, but certainly we've been able to recruit slightly differently from our home-based advisors. And you see really 3 really good examples here. You will note that they are slightly older maybe than average. We've got the carers, the stay-at-home mums, people with caring responsibilities, people who don't want to commute, that would rather put fluffy slippers on and cross a corridor, and indeed people who are semi-retired. And Anthony's an interesting one because he's an engineer, he's accumulated a lot of knowledge, he's an expert in his field, but he just doesn't want to be an engineer anymore. But we get the benefit of him using his brain to enhance the kind of queries that are coming into our contact centers, which are, because of automation, a lot harder than they used to be. Just some general stuff. Again, the team leaders and managers amongst you, one of the things that we have seen is that distance isn't dead. So yes, we're valuing face-to-face, but actually we're communicating a lot more during this pandemic as well. So email use has increased around most organizations. We've got Zoom Doom at the moment, death by meeting days, video conferences, back-to-back, lots and lots of meetings. So we're having more meetings, they're shorter, but which is maybe the good news. So actually what the evidence that we're finding is that with our direct teams, we've been communicating probably more than pre-pandemic. It's the people that we maybe don't see or don't talk to quite so often. They're the relationships that have really started to decline. And in particular, those kind of serendipitous conversations. I, by the way, hate the word serendipity, but it implies I bump into people in an office. Yes, that's part of it. But we're missing out on those kind of informal conversations that aren't so driven by meetings. And again, how do we use innovation potentially to plug that gap? Here's some innovation that we've been looking at, unsurprisingly, using things like virtual reality and augmented reality. So everything from using VR, and I have to say I'm a little bit skeptical about VR. I call it vomity reality. I don't want to sit with a headset on for 9 hours a day for a start, and I'm not very good with those headsets either. But certainly there's a sweet spot for training. You can see there Nicola Sturgeon, you may recognise First Minister for Scotland with our CEO. That's actually some work we've been doing with University of Glasgow on education. We've got actually fascinatingly a paramedic with an augmented reality headset on there and a haptic glove. He's actually broadcasting using 5G, real-time, high-definition video and also touch back to a remote doctor who is literally looking through his eyes. And again, remote diagnostics in healthcare have really started to accelerate. So augmented reality, I think, has benefited a lot more by the pandemic than virtual reality. And then you've got a whole raft of remote expertise type jobs. So everything from, you can see one of our open reach engineers again with a headset on, and we can have an experienced engineer looking again through his eyes. We've been using the camera on customers' smartphones with permission and from the customer. We can take control of the camera and the lights. So for our broadband diagnostics, we can literally say, can you just show me what you've got plugged in? We can use pattern recognition to auto label the sockets and the wires to help both the customer and the remote advisor start to diagnose broadband problems. Now, obviously, that means we don't need to send broadband engineers into people's houses, which we don't want to do either. But also there's a cost implication there. We don't have to send so many engineers out. And actually looking at net promoter scores for that, customers really like it. And then the most mind-boggling one, I thought nothing to do with contact centers, to be honest, but I just thought I'd put it in for fun, is the Chinese guy there is actually a miner. You got it right, a miner. He looks as if he's powering a games console, but he's actually piloting mining equipment remotely, again using 5G. So you might think only white collar jobs can be done from home. Perhaps in the future that might not be the case. Finally, my final D is the one that we've been talking about for a long time in the contact center industry, which is the effect of automation. And obviously there was a lot of hype pre-pandemic. That hype seems to have died a little bit. I think things like chatbots maybe has not lived up to some of the hype. And certainly if you look at some of our autonomous customer data, only 21% of customers globally were rating digital experiences as good. And as a result, what we've actually found, again, pre-pandemic, we're doing some more research at the moment as to how customers might have changed during the pandemic. But when the digital experience fails, people tend to reach for the phone. And that's where your advisors come in again, because they are dealing with complex inquiries, emotive inquiries. They need empathy. They need to be able to care. They need to negotiate. They need expertise in their brains that we can't necessarily write into a knowledge base. All of those things are the skills that we need for agents into the future. And we did write a paper called Botman versus Super Agent around how our agent skills are changing. So I mean, I've never said that artificial intelligence is one of those rip and replace things. I don't think we're going to see our contact centers, whether they're centers obviously is a big debate. So they might not be big physical spaces, but they might be a virtual network of experts. But those experts are not going to get wiped out by technology. It just means that their job gets a lot more difficult, and by definition much more difficult to measure. Now, machines might look really productive, we might look very unproductive because we are doing the difficult stuff. So again, that goes right back to what I said at the beginning around productivity. How on earth do we measure it in an era where machines have made our jobs a lot more complicated? So yeah, that was a bit of a skip through some of the research. I'm going to stop sharing now and hand you back to Charlie.
You're on mute at the moment.
Apologies for that, everyone. Yeah, lots of really interesting stuff there, Nicola. I'll take you through some of my really key takeaways from that in a moment, but I just want to point everybody in the direction of the quiz, which you can, if you're in the chat room already, you can take part in, but if you want a quick last chance to join the chat room and win that bottle of champagne, a box of chocolates that we have for offer, simply go to www.callcenterhelper.com/chat. That's a bit of a mouthful. Bit easier is cch.chat for you there. So yeah, Nicola, lots of really great points. I thought the stat that the average kind of workers a working day had increased by 48.5 minutes was quite worrying actually in terms of employee well-being, but it's very a lot of food for thought there. The fact that technology has moved fast but culture needs to catch up, there's lots of really great information on that slide there. I'd recommend everybody in the chat room to download those slides later and look through, because there's lots of great stuff on those slides. And also the idea I really liked was the kind of co-working spaces as well. I think that helps up a lot for the hybrid models that people were talking about earlier. So lots of really, really great stuff there. I will quickly take us on now to our quiz there. Excellent. I will hit the play button, and yeah, I can see 99 people have already joined and ready for the quiz. So let's get this started. So true or false, on average 66% of consumers use a different channel, 3 different channels for contacting customer service. Bit of a mouthful. Is it A, true, or B, false? I'll let the answers come in. I'll make the screen a bit bigger for everybody too. So, excellent. I'll give everybody a couple more moments to have a think about this one before I press next. And yes, most people are getting that one right with true. This statistic came from a Microsoft report that also found lots of other interesting stats, like 74% of respondents had contacted customer service by phone in the past year, which I think actually works quite well with Nicola's point about the resurgence of phone and people panicking and picking up the phone. And also email is the next most popular channel with 62%. Excellent. So we quickly move on to our next question. which is what percentage of customers expect organizations to use AI and automated voice services to answer simple queries? Is it A, 20%, B, 40%, C, 60%, or D, 80%? And this one actually comes from Nicola's report from earlier this year. So a little plug there, Nicola. It's called the Autonomous Customer 2020. If you want to take a look at that after, lots of really interesting stuff in there. Some of it I poached. Excellent. So see, a bit of a surprise answer to that one for a lot of people was 80%. And yeah, this, as again I said, that it was found from Nicola's report, and this figure had actually risen from 67%, which was the figure found in 2017, and just in 3 years, it went up to 80. So lots of interesting stuff. Mark is currently in the lead now as we move on to our next question, which is, which of the following technologies was used by fewer contact centers in 2019 than in 2016? Was it A, desktop consolidation, B, speech analytics, C, wallboards, or D, WFM software? This is another quite tricky one, actually. But I will say that the three, which the answer is not, have risen quite sharply. Excellent. See a couple more answers, give everybody a little last chance. And the answer was, in fact, wallboards, which most people got right there. So while the use of wallboards has decreased, each of the other technologies saw a great rise in usage, as I alluded to, as did other technologies like performance management tools, IVRs, which is an interesting one, and customer feedback solutions. Excellent. And Graham is still in the lead now, as we come into the last question. So which former US president once said the most reliable way to predict the future is to create it? Is it A, Abraham Lincoln, B, Barack Obama, C, George Washington, or D, John F. Kennedy? And just a reminder that the person who comes out on top of this will win the box of chocolates or bottle of champagne. So adding a bit of last minute pressure. Excellent. And you see that Abraham Lincoln is correct there. Lots of people getting that one right too. Another great Abraham Lincoln quote is, "You cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow by evading it today," which is all links nicely to the future theme. And Graham is indeed the winner. So congratulations, you didn't lose your nerve at the end, and you you win that bottle of champagne, a box of chocolates, and we'll be in touch after today's webinar. If I can close this, excellent, excellent. So what I'm going to go now is quickly into the chat room for your top tips and questions. What you could also do is, if you could just put in one or two words what you like best about Nicola's presentation. Also, it's really great to hear your great feedback. But now we quickly move on to those top tips and questions. There we go. So the first question that we have come in is from Teresa, who says, how do your senior managers be more visible virtually when floor walking was one of the ways they would have engaged with their contact center agents? I don't know. I'll put this one to you, Nicola. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think that's where we've seen over the past few years, as we've seen more remote agents, that's where the sort of contact center software and the unified comms software starts to come together. So it's things like, having presence information, being available on chat, just being a presence that agents know that you're there and you're available if they need you. So I think, yeah, that's why we've seen this big converging sort of set of to what were disparate, some kind of visibility, plus things like I think virtual stand-ups before and after shifts are pretty standard as well. So the stuff that we probably would do in the physical contact center, we're now doing over tools like video conferencing and audio conferencing instead. So yeah, I think there are certainly ways to be visible. But as I said, as a team manager and leader, you do have to work quite hard to make sure that visibility, agents are aware and that you're communicating very regularly with them to make sure they still feel part of a team.
I imagine kind of video conferencing tools are probably the key here. Would you agree with that, Mike?
Oh, without question, Charlie. Yeah, and the extraordinary sort of like rise in popularity for things like this, like Zoom. Also, you got Teams on the Microsoft side, so many different tools like that are getting a massive sort of boost really in adoption. Gamification is also quite an interesting one, which may add a little bit of help, if you like, in that context as well, just with regards to sharing visibility. So from that point of view too, just don't rule that out as a potential way to help.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Actually, I hadn't necessarily thought of gamification, but it really does help the kind of team cohesion, I
Yeah.
imagine, and in that aspect. So yeah, it's a very interesting one. Another question has come in now from Colleen, who says, do we now have a better opportunity to deploy round-the-clock workers? So UK working, what would be evening elsewhere for increased operation windows opportunities, more flexibility for businesses, and opportunity to do something different for agents. I don't know, Mike, if you have any thoughts on this one too.
Oh yeah, certainly. I think the notion, if you like, of not commuting to work, not sort of like the preparation for that, getting to work, then sort of like the sort of interaction, then logging on and being effective for work, that's just being compressed down to a couple of minutes, right? So from that perspective, I think people will be more accessible to working hours in much more different chunks than they were traditionally used to. And that creates great opportunities for things like this. So, maybe sort of you're working later in the evenings or earlier in the mornings. And I think the work opportunities will be there as people realize that the agent resources are there and kind of willing to take up those type of shifts.
Yeah, I think, sorry, Nicola, go on.
Follow the sun contact centers have been around for a while, but I think a lot of people are now questioning whether they need to actually be physically near an office to work. And there does seem to be a trend at the moment. One of my best friends is an estate agent, saying that there's a trend to sort of move out from urban areas, maybe into slightly less urban, suburban, or even rural, because you can afford larger properties at a much more competitive price where there is an appropriate workspace. So I think obviously, that's been reported as a trend over the past few months. Whether that will be sustained, I don't know. But even if we do have to commute a lot less, we're not so constrained with geography than we used to be.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. It's a very interesting question, actually. Thanks, Colleen. Another tip that we've had, our first tip that we've had come in is from Rob, who says flexibility will be a key feature of the future of contact centers, and I think that actually links quite well to your last answers, everybody. And we've also had quite a lot of predictions come in, so this is a nice new predictions page, and the prediction from Odette was prediction digital adoption will be the norm. I see another one come in now from David, who says contact centers will no longer be location specific. The best agents workers can be hired regardless of proximity to physical location. And again, that comes back. But one final tip of this section now is from Amanda, who says, I run a weekly drop-in session for the team. People can choose to drop in or not. We also did a regular team coffee break to get the chance to get all agents together, even for 15 minutes, and enjoy a coffee break virtually. A reminder that we are all human after all, and I think that's a nice tip that works very well. But now I think that's a nice place to kind of end this section. We'll come back to your thoughts from the chat room later, but I'll pass over to Mike now to share his presentation.
Excellent, thanks, Charlie. Let me just share my screen. Just confirm to me that you're seeing it okay. Here we go.
Yes. Let's hit up on the screen.
Full screen?
Yeah, perfect.
Great, okay, excellent. Okay, thank you very much. And so hi everybody, I'm Mike from Genesis, and I've got a hard act to follow, really, just so you know. So thanks, Nicola, that was really, really interesting. And I always learn lots of things, not just something new. I learn lots of things new from your session. So thank you very much for that. And my kind of reflection really for preparing this little talk was around about kind of some of the topics that have surfaced already, and especially around things like digital, which is kind of interesting because we have seen a lot of activity around that area. And from that perspective, it hasn't actually sort of achieved the kind of successes I think that we all thought it would. So from that perspective, I suppose I've got a little bit of caution, if you will, in my thinking. And I also kind of feel as well that we have to remember the customer, and I think we have to figure a way to keep that customer and the customer's sort of the customer's question, answering the customer's question. We got to keep that paramount and not let it get lost in lots of choices and lots of automations. We have to kind of keep fulfilling the customer's requirements. So to that end, let's kind of see how we get on, and I look forward to the comments afterwards. So we see a lot of this around, if you will, in the industry, and customers are out there, like the brands are investing in technology. They're kind of working hard to step up to meet the challenges that are presented by their volumes of their customer contacts. Sometimes those are maybe just turning out to be disappointing. And if I am a kind of a consumer and I'm sort of being streamed in one direction when I need to go a different direction, and I kind of know that and I kind of feel that, it's not quite nice. Also, sometimes I kind of feel that I'm trying to be I can feel that trying to, I'm being sort of squeezed, if you like, into something which doesn't feel quite right to my problem. And it's like, well, actually, is this meeting my requirements? So to that end, what you will tend to find, if you will, over time, is that the customer starts to become frustrated and starts to get feeling a little bit impersonal. And obviously, you're frustrated and impersonal feeling customers will tend to look for alternatives. And that's obviously a very challenging situation for organizations. And as a provider of technology, if you like, into this space for many years, we've always had a very strong focus at providing tools that help you maximize efficiency. And from that perspective, that's a very core value, very, very important value. And it has sort of served us very well. Similarly with effectiveness and making sure that we are, if you like, measuring the right things and improving in the right direction and achieving the results that we are pursuing. But I think what has taken a bit of shadow to both of those really has been the empathy element. And, how does this actually feel to be a customer being managed, if you like, by the drives for better efficiency and scouring for more effectiveness? Are we actually remembering that we are dealing with a human here who is frustrated and needs kind of help, and putting some context to that and making sure it's relevant? And I think perhaps we have forgotten that a little bit, and the previous slide, I think, shows that in the chase for better, and maybe it's just naivety, if you like, in some of the design work that's gone on with the tools that we offer to our customers to work with. But certainly I think the customer does feel this could be better. The edges are too sharp and you're kind of bruising me. You're not actually helping me. So, we have a situation where there's a lot of interactions happening out there, and we at Genesis, our birthday is coming up next Monday. I've been invited to an all-employee birthday celebration on Monday. It's our 30th year, which is amazing. But from the point of view of a brand like us and a provider like us who kind of like provides software for our customers to help manage interactions, typically per annum, we're handling about 70 billion interactions, which is, extraordinary quantity. But what certainly surfaces kind of very much consistently from our customers, and the kind of thing they're trying to pursue, is this notion of, like, how can you help me get better at delivering like a personalized experience? All right. And that starts to become, the sort of like the major requirement, understanding Mike today and what he needs today and solving his problem, but doing that for all of my customers, not just my VIPs. And from that perspective, that starts then to become, I think, the real sort of step back sort of question I like to sort of contact center of the future. Are we actually getting that right? And if we're not, then let's just step back and get that right before we embark into more shiny things. Because the research is out there, and the facts prove it, that by empathizing with the customer and kind of building that sort of trust relationship, trust will kind of come if you demonstrate that you're listening and you actually fulfill. That's kind of what customers want to feel. That kind of builds the loyalty, and so we have this kind of circle of improvement. And from that point of view, you would expect to see, absolutely, on the back of that, customer satisfaction would be hugely increasing. So it should. But similarly, you have things like the Harvard Business Review validating that if the guys who are leaders in loyalty, for example, will see a 2.5 times increase in their revenue growth compared to their peers, because they adopt this sort of priority on loyalty and driving that as a core value into the way that they fulfill and work with their customers. So, great ambition, but Mike, how am I going to do this to scale? And that's really, I think, the idea then of the personalized experience for everybody, not just for those VIPs. And in a way, if you will, I've always kind of felt in my work, I always like to help customers improve. That's been a kind of core value for Mike Murphy, if you will. And I've really enjoyed working in this space because, you know, I've been able to kind of do that again and again, which has been superb. But if you like, sometimes I'm still sort of surprised, and sometimes we're kind of blindsided. And from that perspective, I think we have to just sort of think about how we organize ourselves. So there's three elements to this that I just want to just open up a little bit on. And from that perspective, the first one on the right is all about the data. And, you know, we have lots of data about customers and employees. And I'll come on to that in a moment. The second part, though, is the artificial intelligence, which really is like a bag of tools like we've never had before. But, you know, are we kind of using them correctly? And that's kind of the challenge, I think, that we're starting to face, because it is there, it is accessible, and it is abundant. But if it's not used properly, just like any set of tools, it becomes quite meaningless. And then lastly, how do we engage with the customer, and making sure that what we do with the customer is engaged correctly? So just lifting each one a little bit. You know, we do have in the contact center the privilege, if you will, of having lots and lots of information about our employees. Okay, so we record all of our calls. We take surveys from customers about their experience with those employees. We create performance statistics. We do workforce management scheduling around these individuals. So from that perspective, we have a lot of information that's useful, as long as we can grab it when it's relevant, I suppose, is the kind of key question. Similarly, with the customer data, we do have our CRMs, and they're very helpful, and we do have our ERPs and our kind of like our back-end systems where we have the kind of commerce of our business happening. And that gives us great sort of information to kind of help us understand the customer and understand the customer's value to us, which is really, really good. But I think we have to open up the sort of like the blinkers a little bit and sort of include all of the customers' activity that they have with your brand. And that absolutely would be having like an online, you know, principal sort of like amount of activity these days, because everything about the customer relationship is kind of steered through their online interactions with you, whether it's self-serving or whether it's just inquiring, shopping, whatever it may be. Like most of the activities they have with your brand, I would say today, is through that online work. And you know, the guys on the left here are the guys who are the kind of powerhouses behind those online interactions. So we should be sort of like, you know, sharing our information, you know, correctly, and leveraging that activities of the customer that we can see across all of these sort of platforms and interactions and tools. And by doing that, then suddenly the picture of the customer becomes much more helpful and much more useful. You know, certainly as a kind of a like to respond accurately. Because remember, I wanted to respond to me right now, but like 5 minutes ago, I had a different feeling. So in that sense, being very real time is kind of helpful. And that's really where the artificial intelligence does come in, because if we do program it correctly and we do have it sort of like configured correctly, that's really where it starts to become extraordinarily valuable, because it's able to work its way through all of those interactions that we have in our databases, work through those terabytes of, you know, sources of information about our people, start to kind of understand the better way to implement automation, and also to kind of give you like a raw feedback as to its success or not. And that is actually, you know, absolutely accessible to us and useful for us, provided that we can kind of service it in the right way. Similarly, about that sort of, you know, gathering information about the customer and the customer right now, and the fact that I can see the customer has been online and has been wrestling with this FAQ, but I can also see that there's 4 cases open in our sort of service area on this same issue. Similarly, I can see there was a product purchase yesterday. So very much in real time, I can understand a lot about the customer before I connect and engage with the customer, you know, to actually try and fulfill. And that itself will steer me very, very smartly into one direction or another, which I think is absolutely what our customers want. Because if I am sort of like able to be, you know, fulfilled in automation, super, let me have it. I just want it quickly. Just kind of give me my time back, give me the answer, and I can move on. But if you're going to make it difficult for me and make it my problem to kind of find the resolution to my issue, that's when I start to become very agitated. So by servicing the right information, we can sort of market better to our customer, we can sell better to our customer, and we can service our customer much better. And I think that's the kind of strategy that we're trying to achieve in the background with this. And the nice thing is, I suppose, for me, it kind of takes away that sort of idea of being put on the back foot or being surprised. I think we can now sort of start to get in step with the customer, because that's it. I'm a consumer. I want to buy something, and I want it like as quickly as possible. It's kind of simple. Sometimes it can become really, really difficult. And I think by getting in step with the customer, by using tools like this, you know, managed like this, arranged and organized and configured like this, then we can kind of achieve that contact center of the future that we talk about. So by sort of like real terms, it should turn out to be something that you don't swear at. It's something that you sort of swear by, because you are fundamentally, or in the end of the game, you are delighted, and the technology seems to be kind of working with you, seems to anticipate, telling me about it. My delivery is kind of coming before I need to kind of ask the question. That's just ideal, okay? Because clearly the brand has thought about what the customer needs to know next. And instead of waiting for the customer to ask, they provided the answer. That's kind of cool working. That's how a brand becomes cool for the customer, because they're thinking for them and providing the kind of information for them empathetically with great sort of customer experience. So that's kind of where I want to stop, Charlie, and hopefully that's been useful. And I'll hand it back to you.
On mute again, aren't I? Excellent. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Mike. Lots of really great points, which I'll share with everybody in a moment. But first of all, I'd quickly just like to put another poll on everybody's screen. There we go. And that's just if you'd like to see a demonstration of the Genesis solution, some of what Mike was just talking about, if you could just fill that in, that would be excellent. But yeah, lots of really good stuff. I really like the whole concept about kind of experience as a service. I think that was very good. Servicing the right, your points around servicing the right information was particularly interesting as well. And kind of, I think, you know, you mentioned a bit about personalizing the customer experience. We're seeing lots of new innovations around how to personalize as well. And I think that's a very interesting concept. I'll end the polling for everybody now. Great, thanks for that. And I also quickly want to put another poll up just around this whole concept of personalization for everybody, just because I think it's a very interesting idea. And I just want to find out, how are you currently personalizing your customer experience? Is that through customization of customer accounts, engaging in digital profiling, implement Know-Me routing, provide personalized outbound communications, or sharing product recommendations? There's lots of ways that you can do this. So if you maybe put some of your other kind of ways that you personalize in the chat room, so that could lead to a really interesting discussion. And a quick point that it is multiple choice, so you can pick more than one answer. Mike, I don't know what you're expecting to come up here, maybe at highest.
Interesting, Charlie. I'm just working my way through the list, but certainly I suppose yeah. So,
it's quite a lot there.
I'm changing. Yeah, I'm changing. But I'm interested in the Know-Me one. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So the Know-Me routing, that's kind of the curious one.
Excellent. Let's see what everybody said. 32% are doing Know-Me routing. The main one there was 47% with provide personal outbound communications, 39% customized customer accounts, 26% sharing personalized product recommendations, and 24% engaging in digital profiling. Sorry. So yeah, lots of interesting ideas there. On the Know-Me routing part, that might have confused a bit of people, as there's lots of different types of routing. I know there's a thing called predictive routing, isn't there, Mike, which is very interesting and futuristic. I don't know if you could tell everybody a little bit about that one.
Yeah, so it was actually I suppose there's like two generations of it in my personal experience, but it was very much like quite a simple strategy, maybe sort of 3 years ago, maybe 3 to 4 years ago, where it was kind of gathering like the core facts, if you like, about your agent teams, and then some core facts about your customer, and trying to make the kind of match. And it worked very well, and for the larger centers, it actually turned out to be very sort of successful, because just by having that sort of arrangement, even at a kind of a high level, gave a significant improvement for the customers. So from that perspective, that sort of matching was sort of seemed to be very good. I think what we're seeing now, though, if you like, is with the more modern sort of like tools, we just have like an abundance really of being able to match. And from that perspective, I think that's very interesting. And you're not just going back to like your last person routing. It's like just getting far more sophisticated than that. And that's actually quite enjoy actually the different outcomes that can be achieved from that.
Yeah, I think it links very well to your point in your presentation as well, of just getting kind of your data managed and in easy places to find, and that will allow you to do all of those capabilities. And yeah, it's a really interesting topic. I think yeah, it's one to definitely look out for in the future.
We do have a lot of data about lots of things that we just don't kind of get to. If you like, we kind of we have it, and then we kind of store it, and then we kind of don't use it so much. And it's like, well, hang on a second, I'm not finished using it yet. So from that point of view, I think that's an important element to it.
Yeah, it's a good, it's a good point. Excellent. I see we have lots of
Also,
predictions. Sorry, Nicola.
just to say, it was interesting that personalized outbound came very high, and I think the next step on that one is not just personalized outbound, but predictive outbound, and that's certainly, if you're going to look at some of the future of customer experience stuff, that's pointing towards the way that you start to tell customers things that they need to know over the right channel and at the right time before they have to tell you. So a lot of that's demand management outwards, which I think is a particularly interesting area as we get more and more data from Internet of Things and smart everything. That's going to be a very interesting one. And obviously then the contact center might have to pick up some demand out off the back of that, but you're pushing at least the initial demand out of the contact center and creating a slightly different dynamic in customer experience.
It's almost like the kind of next step of proactivity and being as contact centers were so kind of stuck in reactive, because that's how contact centers were built. But it's slowly becoming more proactive, and I think it's very, very promising for the future, hopefully. So quickly moving on to a prediction now from Amanda, who says, I believe that AI offers phenomenal opportunity to help expand the skill sets of people. We can utilize our real human skills more effectively. I think this is interesting. I'd like to hear both of your thoughts on this. I can see you nodding, Nicola, so I'll put it to you first.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the showy-offy bit of AI tends to be things like bots and stuff like that. But I think the other thing is augmented agents, I think, are a really interesting one. And the rationale behind that is you can't train agents on everything. Products are becoming much more complex. How do you actually support them as well? So I think in terms of that augmented intelligence piece that I mentioned at the end of my presentation, I think agents could be a very key beneficiary of that, so that they don't have to go on training courses every hour. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting one, and as I said, it doesn't replace their skill sets; it enhances it.
Yeah, and I'm sure you'll go along with that as well, Mike.
No question. Like we've got a kind of a notion called agent assist, really, and it's kind of like that sort of, I call it like a wise owl sitting on your shoulder, which I wouldn't recommend really, but just having that sort of like expert kind of watching and listening, and not necessarily kind of, not for like the quality improvement or that type of thing. It's just more about kind of helping and at the right time, if you like, servicing information to make sure that whatever is required for the auditors is provided in the right sort of order and there's nothing missed, or whatever information that's needed from the customer. I need 5 pieces of information. We'll make sure that all 5 are there before we kind of move on, that type of thing. So actually quite helpful and realistic and useful. So from that perspective, more to come from that for sure.
Excellent. Yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting future where all these technologies are concerned. I'm aware of time, so I'll quickly blast through a few of your tips to get them shared with everybody. This tip's from Amanda, who says, analyze your standard processes. Where are you making things difficult for the customer? Are you literally making your issue the customer's problem? I think that's very common. That's a very good tip there from Amanda. We have one from Charles now, who says, complete all remote coaching via video call. This way you can still pick up on non-verbal communications. I think that's a very good point and links very well to the conversation we were having earlier. Laura says, give your senior team / tenured agents refresher training on soft skills and empathy. After hearing the same issues over and over, it can be easy to cut the customer off and just spew out the solution. We must remember to empathize with the customer first and address the empathize with the customer and address the emotions first. I think that's a very nice tip there, Laura. Another tip from Amanda, trying to win the bottle of champagne today, I see, is that calling remains king at the first point of frustration. When customers hear a real person who understands and empathizes with the issue, it really helps to diffuse the situation. I think we have time as well for one last question for you both. And that's from Alison, who says, if we're expecting more from our agents in the future, i.e. super agents, does this mean that we need to pay more? And what advice do you have about getting this agreed within the organization? Nicola, I guess this links to your super agent slide from earlier, but yeah.
That certainly is one of the implications. Having said that, you can sometimes trade off salary for flexibility. So I think, again, some of the research that was coming out before the pandemic, and it's being kind of reinforced after, is saying if you give me flexibility in a job, I don't necessarily need you to pay me the big bucks. But I do think the implication is as the agent skill sets become much more sophisticated, they're dealing with the real complexity. It isn't an entry-level job. To be honest, it's never been an entry-level job. And the last thing you want your people to be are robots, because frankly, robots are better at being robots than people. So I think, first thing, from an AI perspective, I've always said it makes us value some of those unique skills that we have for being human, that maybe aren't valued so much at the moment. So I think we might need to pay them a bit more, but we could trade that off by giving them a lot more flexibility and choice as to how, when and where they work.
Yeah, and lots of really interesting points there. I know, Mike, kind of in your job, you're kind of used to kind of, but you see a lot of kind of business cases for technology and stuff, and asking the organization for money. What would your kind of tips be on that front?
I mean, I think it is that sort of like that I suppose one of the things that we did talk about already is the notion of more less organized shifts than we had to have before. So from that point of view, the idea of being able to grab that skill set, maybe, less frequently, less in more smaller pockets of time, I think could be interesting. So like, being available for several hours, but over many hours, if that makes sense. So from that point of view, logging on for work and then maybe coming off for a couple of hours and then logging back on for an hour and going back off again for a couple of hours. That type of thing could start to be helpful there.
Yeah, excellent. I think that's a really good kind of tip to end on now. And quickly though, we do have time for a few last things. So if you could quickly put in the chat room in 1 or 2 words, what did you like best about the webinar? That'd be great. We like to collect feedback. And the winning tip and the winner of the bottle of champagne or a box of chocolates is from Teresa, who says, to help engagement, we've had a biscuit break, which bring in and talk about your favorite biscuit and whether you dunk it. Oh, what a topic that is. And mug shots. Bring in your favorite mug and tell me the story about why it's important to you. They've both worked really well for us. I think that's a really nice conversation starter for those virtual coffee mornings that lots of contact centers had. So yeah, congratulations, Teresa. That's a great tip. Also, more of the feedback theme. If you could complete the survey when you leave the webinar, it's just 4 questions long, but again, we really like to hear your feedback. And if you'd like to catch up on this webinar, watch it again, you can, it'll be available later this afternoon. See from www.callcenterhelper.com/recorded-webinars. Excellent. We have some more webinars in the series too, so you can still register for those from the link at the bottom there. But I guess you know where to find it. And just one last chance to thank both of our speakers. So firstly, thanks for joining us today, Nicola.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Really interesting seminar. So yeah, good. Thanks.
Excellent. And thanks to you as well, Mike.
Welcome, Charlie. Thank you.
Great.
Great to take part in this.
Excellent. And thanks everybody for watching, and hopefully we'll see you again next week. Goodbye.